Welcome to this episode of Chatting with Stacks. I'm your host, Bill Stacks, and today I got Leonard.
Hey, Bill.
What's going on, Leonard? How are you?
Good afternoon. That's quite a rousing opening video you have there, where you point the gun at me and then shoot me in the face.
Yeah, with the logo.
Anyway, it's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I hope we don't both regret this eventually.
Hey, you never know, right? Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Sure.
So, where does your story begin?
This story began, I'm trying to think about where did it begin? It probably began, when I was born in the middle of the 20th century in Philadelphia. And then I guess maybe driving home with some friends from a racetrack where I got exposed to marijuana for the first time. I didn't smoke any, but it was in the car, and I felt different when I went home. I was about 17, and my mother says hi, and I, was. And then the next time was a week later. We went to New York to visit my cousin who lived in Greenwich Village. My mother went out, and I had some with him, and it was like my life went from black and white to color. Like suddenly everything made sense and everything was beautiful. And I remember how much I must have liked it, because the next night my mother said, "Hey, you want to go see the Rockettes, Radio City Music Hall?" And I said, "No, I'd rather go back to Cousin Bob's apartment to smoke pot, as opposed to go see all these women with their legs up in the air. The pot was more interesting to me." And I don't think I spent a day without getting 26 years after that, except for a couple stints in the hospital. So
every day,
every single day. If it's good one day, it's going to be good the next day.
Yeah, a lot of people nowadays, I think they get complacent with it, and they think it's not that big of a deal, but it really does affect you quite a bit.
Especially now, we had the strongest pot possible at the time, but I do hear there's some even stronger strains now. And I know on a teenage brain, it's very dangerous. And now heart attacks and strokes are happening in younger population, probably from smoking pot. I would say definitely. If you look at the studies, if you Google marijuana, young people, heart attacks, strokes, there's a lot of new information. I know that because I publish a health and wellness newsletter called the Addiction Recovery eBulletin. So I have to read like 100 articles a week about drugs and its effects on society. It can have a very good effect. I think, marijuana can be a very innocuous drug, but not if you're smoking every day. And not if you're too young and your brain is still forming. It can mess you up big time. And to this day, I think maybe it wasn't such a good idea smoking pot. It took me a few years after I quit to think maybe that wasn't such a good idea. It felt right at the time. So that's sort of how the story started.
You didn't get into hard drugs? It was just pot?
Well, I did. I snorted every day for 13 years. Literally every day. But it was only the 13th year that I thought maybe I had a problem and that maybe I was addicted. Because for 12 years, every time I did a line or a spoon, I did it because I wanted to. But the 13th year, I would tell myself, I'm not going to get until after dinner. But right after lunch, I'd be snorting again. And I would say, not this weekend. And I couldn't go Friday night without getting. That scared me. But luckily, a friend introduced me to MDMA, which is ecstasy, and I could that instead. So I quit and I started snorting ecstasy, which was the drug that eventually led me into rehab. That's the one that I couldn't control. Everything else I sort of had a handle on. I thought when I stopped doing, they would take that little pocket out of the jeans You know, that little, I hear it's for coins. I thought
Yeah.
that's where you kept the little glass vial. You know, that's when I quit, I thought, oh, everyone's going to quit. But it was a good drug at the time. You know, I only smoked it a few times and I realized that was dangerous. That was too good. I remember giving some to a friend of mine. I guess they called it free back in the day. And the next day I called him. I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "It was the first time I ever tried to scrape the outside of a vial." Meaning that's how good it was. Really good. It was good. But the reason I quit because if I was and someone called me, I didn't want to pick up the call. And I was in business at that time, and I realized it was going to end up costing me money. You know, you can't be a drug dealer smoking. You're just not really, you know, it's a silly thing to do. Stupid to do.
So how did it transpire for you to go to rehab? How did that all
How did that happen? Well, that was, I thought, well, gee, I had a bad night. I mean, a good night. I had a great night. But unsafe sex, a lot of drinking, a lot of ecstasy. I wasn't doing anymore. And I woke up with a hangover worse than anything I ever had. You know, and I remember being in bed looking up and I thought my bedroom looked like a cave. It was like suddenly I was in a cave. I was in the bottom of a cave. I could see the stalactites dripping moisture into my bedroom. And it was just, and I thought, how the hell did I get here? And then I realized I had an appointment for a massage at 11 o'clock. And I thought, okay, I don't want to disappoint Penny was her name. I got to go get my massage at 11 o'clock. I managed to get there. 5 minutes into the massage, I said, "Excuse me." And I went outside and threw up. Because, you know, and then I went back in, and 10 minutes later into the massage, I said, "I'm sorry, I got to go outside and throw up again." And I started thinking, is this what I didn't move to California for this, you know, from Philadelphia. I said, there's something wrong with this picture. And I excused myself. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm going." And sweating. It was in July. I stopped at a phone booth where I spent a lot of my life at phone booths. There's pictures in the book of me at a phone booth or two. And the only person I knew on earth who was clean and sober, as I didn't know that expression, saw me at the phone booth. She was shopping. She came over, said, "Hi, how are you?" And I said, "Pretty good," because I hadn't thrown up in 20 minutes. I said, "I'm feeling pretty good." Meanwhile, the sweat is hitting her in the head. And she said, "Because you don't look too good." I said, "Well, you know, I'm getting better." And then we talked a little while. And then at the end, I said to her, I says, "Does that rehab you went to have an 800 number?" Because it's not, I'm not going to spend money, but if it had an 800 number, I'll write it down. I wrote it down. I go back to my house, and there's a guy taking a picture of my house. And it wasn't for sale. It wasn't for insurance. I didn't know what it was, but I backed off, and I saw a guy taking a picture of my house, little camera. And a friend of mine had recently gotten busted like 3 days before that. And he used to come over and score for me on a regular basis. So I thought, he's in jail. They're going to show him these pictures and say, can you identify this as the house you used to go score in? So I don't know if that was true or in my imagination, but once the guy stopped taking pictures of my house, I ran in, I packed up my car, I went down to Big Sur. And while I was in Big Sur, I called the 800 number. And they talked to me for a while. And they said, "Okay, now how are you going to pay for this?" First of all, they said, "We'll accept you," which was a surprise because I never had a DUI, was never busted for anything.
Yeah, there was no real reason for you to go, and you needed a kind of a reason back then, right, to go.
Yeah, and I was just having a bit of a nervous breakdown. And she said, how are you going to pay for this? I said, well, I got some insurance from a camera store back in Philadelphia that I had because the owner of the store had an affair with my mother. And as penance, he gave the whole family health insurance. So I gave her and then she says, well, if we don't accept you, we'll find a hospital that will. I said, are you fucking kidding me? I don't need a hospital. I just need a little R&R. And then she said, okay, well, we'll run your numbers and call you back. And I had a cell phone at the time, even though it was 30 years ago. And I'm at the bar, this place called Ventana. I'm at the bar and they call and they say, your insurance covers this 100%. And I just started bawling because I knew the jig was up. I had no excuse not to go. And at the time I was raising my son, but this was July and he was home with his mother coming back to live with me in September for the school year. So there was nothing on my calendar for the month of August. And they said, be here, August 3rd. And I ended up driving there. And I had no intention of quitting marijuana. It was just the white powders that was sort of getting to me. The ecstasy is not good for your spinal fluids. And I remember telling my friend, I said, hey, I'm going to rehab. I got 2 joints, one for the ride there, one for the ride back. And he said, it was only an hour and a half away. It's not far. He said, why don't you give me the joint for the ride back. I'll hold it for you. I said, fine. And so I drove there. I was going to stop on the way for a drink, but I got lost. And I'm a bit of a people pleaser. And they had a window to check in. I thought, oh, fuck, I can't even get a drink. Went there, went up to the front desk. I said, is this where you check in? And they said, check in. It's not a hotel. It's a hospital. This is where you get admitted. I said, okay, you're going to play semantics with me? All right. And then and then I checked in. 2 days later, all desire for drugs left me. Just like that, just all desire for drugs, and alcohol is a liquid drug. All desire for drugs left me after getting high every single day for 26 years. So how that happens, I don't know. I don't really care. But it's akin to being reborn as a different person. And then comes the identity crisis. Like, well, who am I now? I can't go out to clubs every night. I can't be a drug dealer anymore. And then it gets more interesting and more difficult. But I don't know what the question was.
And then the emotional, you go through the emotional part, right? The emotional breakdown, basically.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I have a friend now, she hasn't been drinking for 2 weeks, but she's getting sick and she's getting ornery. And I said to her, I said, you think quitting drinking was such a good idea? She said, no, I've been sick every day since, because you can't just quit. You have to have something to do instead, whether it's, a good therapist, group therapy, start a business, start a project. It's hard just to quit without even, not Hunter Thompson, the other guy, the junkie, William Burroughs. William Burroughs said, you can't just stop an addiction. You can just replace it with another one. And therapy is something, and certainly the 12-step groups is
But
something.
alcohol should be monitored. If you're quitting alcohol, you should be monitored when you do that, because it's pretty dangerous.
Yes. Well, I was in a rehab, so I was going, it was a doctor there. So but yeah, you shouldn't just stop cold turkey, delirium tremors or anything like that. You should have and drugs too. And marijuana is the most difficult because it's the most subtle. It's the one that doesn't have any dramatic consequences. You're not crashing cars. Hopefully you're not losing a relationship. you might be late for work, but you show up. It doesn't have the kind of consequences that hard drugs or alcohol will have, but it's just as insidious as the rest. And it's like I said, I loved it more than anything for years. When I was 19, I was using a lot of, I'll use the word addicted. I was addicted to hashish. I loved hashish. And then we couldn't get any in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, there was no hashish. And we checked with people in New York. There was no hashish in New York. I said to my friend, I said, we got to go to Israel and get some red Lebanese hash because that's what we were smoking. He said, you're right. I said, but we have to drop out of college. He said, look, it's only a community college. I said, okay. We dropped out of college and went to Israel to bring back hashish.
Tell me that story. Yeah.
Our family thought we were, what? It was
Tell me that
fabulous
story. Tell me about the whole trip.
Well, our family thought we were going to discover our roots. Our friends thought we were going to smuggle and make money. We were just going to get our stash. We ended up with a little extra, but we were just really going to get a stash because we couldn't see how you could go a day without getting high on hashish. That's how good that was. That's how powerful that was. I don't want to say that's how dangerous it was, but we went to any length, and we flew that 12-hour nonstop flight from New York to Tel Aviv. And when we got off the plane, we rented a car, and there was a rainbow. And we thought, oh, that's a good omen. That's a good trip. And we just went to Jerusalem and started asking, can you sell us this much, and who can sell us this much? And then we ended up buying these bricks. I have a picture here somewhere. These 200-gram bricks of hashish that we ended up sticking in. The night before we were to leave Israel, we went shopping at a lingerie store for girdles. Two guys shopping for full body girdles because that's what we're gonna stick the shit into. And we luckily she didn't say, really, what are you really planning to do?
Because it wasn't like now. It wasn't like today how they search you and they make you take your shoes off, right? It wasn't. Yeah.
No, it was no. It was before 9/11 or any of that nonsense. But they did. Coming back into Kennedy Airport, I thought, fuck, if there's any dogs on duty, you can't fool a dog. They must have been having their own lunch because we went through. And if either of us had gotten caught at the time, it would have been years in prison because that's still smuggling. And God forbid we would have gotten caught in Israel because there the punishment is even worse because God forbid one of their Israeli soldiers would get stoned and miss the Palestinians they were shooting at. So they don't want to.
They give you like life in prison over there. They give you hard sentence.
Yeah, and probably 10 years in New York. So I can't. So I'm a very lucky human being. Whenever anything goes wrong in my life, I think I could still be in prison. Maybe not now. I would have been out, but I wouldn't be the person I am today. And
have you had a lot of run-ins with the police? Have you had a lot of run-ins with the police over
the day before high school? I got arrested. The day before high school, I got arrested in Philadelphia, thrown into a cell. I'm like 15, and I'm in a cell, and I do the first thing I think any kid does in a jail cell. They see if they could squeeze through the bars, because that couldn't happen. I'm in jail behind bar cells the night before my first day of high school. I was charged with corner lounging, which was against the Philadelphia thing, corner lounging, if like to keep gangs from gathering, and so the next day in high school, I looked around. I thought, this is all bullshit. I was just in jail last night for corner lounging. It gave me a problem with authority figures, and which is not a good way to start high school, thinking all these people are just bullshit. This is just some hierarchy to keep you suppressed or something. But no, that was the only time I think I've ever been fingerprinted, when I was like 15 or 16 before high school. But no, I got very lucky. And I'll tell you, a year after going to Israel and smuggling it back in my own pants, I went again. But this time I hired a woman I met there to bring it back on her whole body. We only had 3 little 200-gram bricks. She had this all over her bird, because she could. And that was also an interesting experience, to say the least. So that was twice I really missed or ducked the bullet, that shoots out. And it didn't stop me from becoming a drug dealer. I did that for 23 years every day of my life. It was my only source of income.
So when you're dealing drugs,
yeah,
do you ever get into a situation maybe where someone's trying to rob you or anything like that?
Well, did you read my book? No, not yet.
I have your book. I do have your book.
The second time I came back from Israel, I was in a place called Kensington. It's very famous, Kensington and Allegheny in Philadelphia.
I've been there.
It's very negatively famous now. Mm-hmm. And I'm in a basement selling my last quarter ounce of, and the quarter ounce is there, and the 2 guys, look at it. One pulls out a revolver, puts it at my head. The other one pulls out the other kind, a handgun. And I'm looking, and I could see the bullets in the chamber. So I'm thinking, I know they're not fucking around. And the other guy has a gun at my heart. And they said, okay, we'll take the hashish and whatever money. And I had $200 on me.